There's a saying that goes around on occasion. Whenever Deus Ex is mentioned, someone reinstalls it. There's basically nothing which meets that bar of importance in the gaming sphere. Titles come and go and only a few stay with us, Deus Ex among them. You could imagine that phrase applying to films like Star Wars or The Godfather or something, but a video game? That's just too rare. There's just something about Deus Ex. Deus Ex was the brainchild of Warren Spector and Harvey Smith, the two having worked on similar projects up to the year 2000. Spector got his start with Ultima and Wing Commander, and while he's listed as director, it's Smith that's a little more interesting. He's credited as lead design, and seemingly sold his soul to make one truly outstanding game. Deus Ex is like nothing ever made before or since. Even Human Revolution, which comes remarkably close to recapturing the brilliance of the original, just doesn't have the same simple but excellent fusion of equipment management and skill progression. Smith is the current studio head of Arcane now, his monkey paw deal to create Deus Ex having sabotaged their latest efforts. And as for Spector, well, Deus Ex would essentially cap off his storied career in the industry. The pair would both work on Thief Deadly Shadows before the close of Ion Storm, basically the only other really good game to come out of that studio unless you count Anachronox. Notably, Deus Ex was another of the earliest immersive sims coming off the back of Thief. Its gameplay lead much more to an RPG like System Shock 1 or 2. By combining elements of the stealth gameplay of Thief with the leveling and implants of System Shock, Deus Ex aimed to create what was for the time a very player-centric take on gameplay encounters. Where other RPGs usually forced combat upon the player, encounters instead would be dictated by each player's unique combinations of skills, equipment, and augmentations, alongside the narrative framing of the player's actions. Experience for leveling was awarded based on exploration and completing objectives, instead of based on combat encounters or finding items. This meant that every player could achieve the same power levels whether they were playing aggressively or stealthy, using any combination of equipment to do so. There is, however, an exception. Augmentations are the unique abilities the player has, which drastically alters their playstyle. These augmentations are hidden throughout the game, and give the player an option for what they want to install. They could be things like subdermal armor to protect from attacks, stealth camo, a flying drone, an active defense system, health regeneration, and plenty of others. This trio of items, skills, and augmentations are the perfect trinity for an immersive sim, providing an excellent menagerie of methods for tackling gameplay challenges. All three contain within them the solutions to both combat encounters as well as traversal challenges, letting players complete the game in whatever way they see fit, and encouraging repeat playthroughs by presenting multiple solutions to each level. You could stealth through using electronic tools and lockpicks, play aggressive with melee and pistols, or wipe out your opposition with heavy weapons and explosives. That doesn't mean the game is perfect, of course. Waiting for the reticle on your weapons to decrease at early levels leaves something to be desired, even if it's not actually as bad as it looks. Combat can sometimes devolve into you just blasting your enemies while they do the same until one of you falls over. Though of course you have plenty of gameplay options to avoid such a thing. The game is also another early title to differentiate between lethal and non-lethal gameplay, giving an extra degree of weight to the player's actions by acknowledging when they take a life. Unlike newer games, however, where playing non-lethal would typecast you into playing stealth, Deus Ex designed its non-lethal tools in such a way that they were useful in both combat and stealth. Non-lethal tools provide unique utility that lethal options lack. The stun prod can hold a foe in place to stop them from turning, while the tranq crossbow does damage over time, encouraging them to be used in tandem with your lethal weapons. It creates a unique experience compared to other games which use a lethal or non-lethal system, since many modern takes need to bolt on some superfluous mechanics to make it more important. There is no morality system in Deus Ex, outside of the occasional remark or reward for killing people or not. Your gameplay choices are respected, no matter what. Now, to be fair, the choices don't always work the way you might hope. The game has so many ways to complete your various objectives that at times the systems determining what you're doing can stumble a little bit. If you don't do things in a certain way or in a certain order, then the game may decide you didn't do it right. As an example, I once had the game determine that Paul died despite having escorted him out of the Ton Hotel. The reason? Because I left through the window of the apartment rather than the front door. the former of which is what you're expected to use if you choose to leave Paul to his fate. And what's even weirder is I've been completely unable to recreate it. I might be going crazy, but I think there's a conspiracy to stop me from saving Paul in my annual playthrough. I just can't prove it yet. The gameplay is only part of the game's charm, though. Its soundscape and music are just as evocative. The game uses a plethora of tracks and moods to ground the player in the world, mostly with a theming of electronics meshed with more traditional compositions. Each track also includes two variations, a conversation theme and a combat theme. Frankly, the soundtrack puts most games to shame. It's truly excellent, and the inclusion of the dynamic tracks makes the game that much more memorable. There's something about traversing the streets of New York with the music bumping in the background, or returning to UNATCO HQ expecting its iconic track, only to have it replaced with a much more foreboding song once you have to escape the facility. Great soundtracks are almost universal with great games. The songs become attached to the identity of the game as well as the people who play it. Few developers realize just how important it really is. The game's graphics haven't exactly aged all that well, though you could hardly fault the developers for that. What does remain powerful, however, is the attention paid to the aesthetic and the evocative nature of the imagery you're presented with. The game opens on one of its most powerful visuals, a massive hand reaching out to take hold of planet Earth. An image whose meaning and severity are instantly understood by the player, even before Simmons and Page begin to converse. There's so much more, though. From the shattered remnants of the Statue of Liberty to the decrepit streets of New York City, every nook and cranny inundated with rats, garbage, and the destitute. The game takes place decades in the future, and yet it doesn't feel like that much has changed, at least for the better. No, instead, the future you see in Deus Ex is a bleak warning of what's to come. You will recognize it by its worst aspects rather than its best, even if there is anything good to take note of. Characters in particular show the turmoil with which humanity must grapple with in the future. Often you're meeting very sickly, disheveled people who are horribly malnourished. Others are paramilitaries or agents, faces obscured behind masks and armor. The men in black are a facsimile of a person. Their more robotic elements cleverly concealed until spoken to. Upon close inspection, their skin is glossy, blue. They hide their eyes behind glasses while still giving off their aura of authority. Then there are the augmentations, people who have undergone invasive surgeries to acquire the earliest versions of cyberware, which you now take for granted. Where JC's boons come from the power of nanotechnology, these people are enhanced, if you could even call it that, with mechanical augmentations, often disfiguring them. They have indeed lost some amount of their humanity, literally, if not figuratively, to the changing world, and the fact that such changes are warned so obviously, it means that much more that JC and his brother can look as normal as they do. The weapons and technology, too, is a step towards a more low-key future. Progress has not changed the world so much as to make a gun look too much different. The simplest design is often the best, after all. Still, though, it is quite old. Animations are pretty janky and silly, though that's actually kind of a good thing. The exaggerated run of characters and their super basic mouth-flap talking animations give them this almost campy feel. Something really impressive is the fact that although the game is running on the original Unreal Engine, the game manages to have outstanding atmosphere courtesy of its basic but effective lighting. Without that touch of having dynamic light, or at least what counted as dynamic for the time, the game would come off as bland or flat. Entire levels and scenes hinge on the lighting, hitting things at just the right angle, and they pulled it off brilliantly. They even added lighting to non-static elements like the dragon-toothed sword. All these systems would be wasted though if the world and story didn't make you feel like it was real. But thankfully, Deus Ex is one of the most original and genuinely provocative games ever made. In a world where rapid globalization has become the norm, it's novel to look back at the turn of the millennium to see at least one criticism of the phenomenon, as fictional as it obviously is. The greatest power and charm that this game has is its setting, the feelings it elicits, and the experience of becoming engrossed in its web of conspiracy. Conspiracies themselves are always a contentious topic, and yet Deus Ex gives its players the permission to believe them by drenching its controversies with a great deal of obvious fictional elements. It's willing to quote tax and employment statistics in one breath, then the next depicts a shadowy globalist agent injecting chemicals into the water supply. It is extremely critical of the relationship between the government and corporations, the rise of globalism, interventionism, and counterterrorism. In many ways, it was essentially tailor-made to remind us of the modern world, as the civil unrest and fears over globalism and technology are eerily mirrored in the game, pitched to the player as serious and difficult questions for society to answer. Its future, dystopic as it might be, is one that is wholly believable, exemplifying the worst future we can imagine for ourselves, based on our rapidly changing world. Much of this is staked on the for the time impressive amount of reactivity found within the game's narrative. Player choice is obviously one of the building blocks of the entire game's design, and so it should not be a surprise that it features heavily in the story as well. These sorts of sentiments are especially carried by the main character, J.C. Denton, a doughy super agent with powerful augmentations whose view of the world is sharply criticized by the events he witnesses. He starts the game as a very basic, by-the-books agent, likely meant to mirror the sentiments of your average American. He cares about his country, trusts in its institutions, and respects the sanctity of society, even if it's flawed. As the game goes on, however, he sees more and more how the world really works. It becomes almost jaded that the world he knew was a lie. And yet he remains a silly idiot for the entire game, having a ton of quotable meme lines.
You mechs might have copper wiring to reroute your fear of pain, but I've got nerves of steel.
You will surrender.
Another peacekeeping occupation?
Not any better. They expect us to take you and Paul alive.
Here comes your chance to be a hero.
Oh my God, Daddy!
What a shame.
There must be something we can do.
He was a good man. What a rotten way to die.
He's a great character, despite not having a huge number of lines. He's iconic because of his weird mannerisms and inflections, coupled with the game's rather awkward animations. Not to mention he just looks cool. He has that whole Matrix look going on, which was popular in the 2000s. The side characters and villains are just as memorable. The game created a diverse set of people supporting your efforts to save the world from plutocracy. Yet, even still behind their actions lies this ever-present notion that they too could have their own agenda. Betrayal is a common theme in the game. Your trust is at times rewarded with a swift attempt on your life. The conspiracy could be anywhere. One misstep and it's game over. That's why the stakes are so high. It's not just you, Paige, and MJ-12 are after. It's the world. The greatest thing that the game lets you do then is to believe. You can say whatever you want about the real world, but Deus Ex isn't afraid to indulge in the absurd and conspiratorial. It gives the player the permission they need to enjoy the game. The permission to take its world seriously and to become engrossed in the horror of it all. In Deus Ex, all your fears about the world are true. Everything you've been led to believe is a lie. And yet with that comes something incredible. It comes with the power to bring those things to an end.
Denton, stopping by my apartment without even saying hello.
I don't like your crowd.
It is time for me to repay the discourtesy. It's over, Casey.
What a battle.
Yeah. She brought a sword to a gunfight.
You brought a sword? What, you think I was gonna fight her with my own sword? The game offers no answers to our real-world problems, no powerful musings unless you consider simply acknowledging how the world works to be profound. It presents you with a confirmation for your fears and a simple task. Follow the truth, but watch your back. All this culminates in a game which could say something that few games can. It did everything right. It is not perfect, of course, and yet it sure as hell puts up a good fight. Every element was practically handcrafted to deliver an experience that would stick with the player for ages after they played it. It showed the potential that the immersive sim genre had, not just in gameplay, but story, tone, atmosphere, art direction, music, themes, and everything else. It's the pinnacle of what the best kinds of game design have to offer. Attention paid to every element. Every choice, every detail is where it needs to be to create the maximum effect. In the end, the effort, the blood, sweat, and tears, the talent behind its creation made into something games have always struggled to achieve. It made the game mean something. Not just because it was good, but because it made you a part of its experience. It made you feel like you were there. That you were really in this dark future racing against the clock. It felt like your actions mattered, because they really did. It made it feel real. There's a saying that goes around on occasion. Whenever Deus Ex is mentioned, someone reinstalls it. I suppose that's your cue. After all, there's just something about Deus Ex. What a sorry state we're in.